Everyone and his lonely dog or her lonely cat are complaining, griping, breastbeating, and bemoaning the pandemic of loneliness. The Surgeon General in the United States even declared it the equivalent of a national emergency. And yet, loneliness or aloneness may actually be the natural state, while socializing with other people, having to interact with them, may be the abnormal state, may be a condition that creates a lot of anxiety and depression. To justify these outrageous statements, I'm going to take you on a tour. My name is Sam Vaknin. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and the very lonely professor of psychology. So we all have an innate experience of existence. We all come into being and then experience the state of being throughout life. We all have boundaries in the sense that we know where we stop and the world starts, and vice versa, where the world ceases to exist and we start. So existence, boundaries, and what is known as the self. The self is just another name for a sense of continuity across space and time, regardless of mutations in personality, in circumstances, in experiences, and in people who come into our lives and then abandon us. Throughout all this, there is a sense of nucleus, a sense of core identity, a sense of something that is immutable, something that is always there. I am. This existence, these boundaries, this sense of self, they are just the internalized gaze of other people. It is through the gaze of other people that we become. It is through the gaze of other people that we experience boundaries. It is through the gaze of other people that we maintain a sense of self. Self is not other people. Everything that is not other people is the self. Other people, their existence, their observations, their feedback, their input are critical. Without this defining gaze, when there is no way to be seen, it's very difficult to maintain an identity which is not diffuse, which is not disturbed. It's almost impossible to retain selfhood, and there's a feeling of encroaching absence and void and a black hole that is about to consume everything, and boundaries become porous, fuzzy, and dissolvable. Other people's gaze is what defines us. This defining gaze starts with mother. When the infant sees itself in mother's eyes, it is then that the infant first realizes that mother is a distinct, separate entity. It is then that the child emerges from what used to be called the symbiotic phase with mother, one organism with two heads. It is then that the child emerges from this merger and fusion, and becomes an individual, divided from mother. And yet, mother's gaze is a traumatizing experience. Let it be clear, to be seen is a survival strategy. A child that is not seen, a baby, a newborn that is not seen, has a very limited life expectancy. The first thing that newborns do, they attract attention to themselves in order to secure food and shelter and changing of diapers and other necessities from the adult environment. To be seen is a survival strategy experienced as a psychological need. And yet, as I said, the moment when the child realizes that it is no longer one with mother, that mother is separate, that mother is autonomous and agentic and out there, external. That is probably the greatest trauma in human life. And this trauma persists lifelong. This trauma accompanies every gaze. The ancient echoes of the maternal trauma, the ancient echoes of recognizing oneself in the mother's gaze as separate from the mother, these ancient echoes of the trauma reverberate throughout life every time we are gazed upon. Every time we apprehend ourselves through another person's gaze, every time we evince our separateness, it provokes anxiety and existential angst, because we realize then that we are essentially all alone, that we cannot build bridges to other people, that the intersubjective space, the space between us and other people, is a myth. It's just a story, a bedtime story, intended to lull us into sleep and to be a self-soothing fiction. The truth is, this gap between us and other people is unbridgeable, is intraversable, cannot be crossed, ever. The intersubjective space is fragmented, is broken. There's no glue that is holding it together. And so, whenever we experience another person's gaze, thereby emerging and becoming separate and external to that other person, at that point, we also re-experience and revisit the trauma. This is called vividness. And when we experience this trauma, it provokes in us anxiety. By definition, therefore, every human contact is anxiogenic. Every touch, every interaction, every exchange and interchange and intercourse with another person leads to anxiety. And because prolonged anxiety leads to depression, results in depression, I think anxiety and depression are the attendant affective hues, the attendant affects, or the attendant states of mind embedded in an integral part of every interaction with another human being. And so we are constructed, we are machines, we are devices that minimize anxiety, strive to minimize anxiety. Our machinery, our mental psychological machinery, aims to minimize anxiety and to quell and ameliorate depression. And so we perceive people as triggers of anxiety and depression, and we wish to avoid them, to shun them, to isolate ourselves, to withdraw. And yet we socialize. Why do we socialize? Why do we bring this upon ourselves? Why do we subject ourselves to other people's gaze, thereby triggering in us anxiety? Because socializing with other people is the cost of the gaze. We define ourselves through other people's gaze. We maintain a sense of continuous existence and being exclusively through other people's gaze. We establish the boundaries of the self through other people's gaze. And so we are addicted to other people's gaze. We cannot survive without it. And it is experienced as a psychological need, as I said. And the cost of this gaze, the price we have to pay, is socializing with other people. The huge revolution in the past 20 years is the invention of the artificial gaze, a non-human gaze, a machine gaze, as embedded in social media and in artificial intelligence. It's a giant revolution in the sense that now we can derive a perception, a self-perception of existence. We can maintain a cohesive, coherent self, personal continuity, boundaries between us and the world. We can maintain all these functions using machines. We no longer need human beings. In this sense, the artificial gaze is cost-free, costless, cost-free. We no longer have to pay the price of socializing with other people, having to tolerate them, having to somehow accept them, having to bear the burden of friction with other people. We no longer have to pay this price, because now we have a perfectly usable and feasible gaze which comes at us from screens. Social media, I mentioned, artificial intelligence is also constructed on the gaze. And this, of course, leads to narcissistic solipsism. We are now given the opportunity to retain our ability to persevere as a continuous entity by using a machine-generated gaze that allows us to disengage from the rest of humanity. And so we become solipsists. We become narcissists. Narcissistic solipsism is a combination of fantasy and the introjection of other people. Fantasy is the rejection of reality, the rejection of life, actually. And instead of interacting with other people in a classical way, face to face, we convert them into symbolic representations, simulacra, and we interact with these simulations, with these internal objects. Put together fantasy and introjection, what you get is pathological narcissism. And this is only the beginning. The next stage, when AI, artificial intelligence, takes over, is we're going to transition to a schizoid-avoidant phase. We're going to develop an autogaze, a self-gaze, kind of self-supply. And then we won't even need any external gaze, not even machine generated. We will be able to internalize the machinery of gazing. At this stage in the development of these technologies, the thrust of these technologies is very clear. For example, intimacy challenges the business model of social media and artificial intelligence. If you interact with other people, with your children, with your spouse, with your girlfriend, with your church, the more time you spend with other people, the less time you spend on social media or artificial intelligence. These technologies monetize your attention, monetize your eyeballs. They need you to be glued to the screen. They are sticky technologies. And if you spend this time with other people, this is a time not spent on these platforms, and which reduces their advertising income. So they are built, they're constructed to destroy intimacy. Number two, these technologies provide self-sufficiency as a main commodity. Shortly, we're going to have the metaverse, and the metaverse will be an all-inclusive totalitarian universe. You will never have to exit the metaverse. You could do everything through the metaverse. Consult a lawyer, go to work, have sex, order a pizza. You would never have to exit your home. And the universe, the artificial virtual universe that is the metaverse. So these technologies are predicated and premised on self-sufficiency. What does it mean to be self-sufficient? It means you don't need other people. It means you can obtain the gaze without paying the price. It means you can avoid other people, withdraw from society, from humanity, from life itself, from reality, and still be able to maintain a sense of coherent, cohesive, continuous identity. The next element is that even when you do interact with other people virtually, for example, on social media, the parameters of socializing, the parameters of interacting with other people are totally controlled by you. You could, for example, block other people. You could ban other people. So socializing is no longer perceived as a give and take. It's no longer perceived as a synergy. It's no longer perceived as a collaboration or a cooperation where the other party is unpredictable to some extent. The other party has inputs and feedbacks with feedbacks which sometimes don't accord with and don't conform to your own beliefs and values. That's in a normal situation, in a non-technological environment, but technology allows you to control the process of interacting with other people to such an extent that actually you end up talking to yourself within a one-man echo chamber, a silo. And finally, technology associates negative effects with profits. The more negative the emotions, the more profitable the platform. Platforms that are built around fear and anger and envy are the most successful. So negative effects are at the core of both social media and artificial intelligence. Negative effects are conducive to a schizoid-avoidant withdrawal state. Because when you maintain negative affects, when you're immersed in negative emotions, negative thinking, hatred, envy, fear, anger, when you're drowning in all these, in these sensations and feelings, avoiding other people, aloneness feels like a great idea. It's ego-syntonous. You feel comfortable to be alone, and you feel uncomfortable to be with other people, because other people trigger in you negative effects which are uncomfortable. Whereas if you're away from other people, isolating yourself, totally withdrawing and avoiding, constricting your life, the likelihood of negative effects is much reduced. You can rail against the world, you can rant and ramble and what have you, but the consequences are highly minimized. So these four aspects or dimensions of technology in confluence encourage you to avoid other people, encourage you to become schizoid, avoidant, encourage you to actually cater to your own psychological needs by yourself with the help of technology, while not paying the cost of having to suffer them. You can now lead your life completely insulated from the vagaries and vicissitudes and exigencies of human relations. Interpersonal relationships are now perceived as undesirable, and the alternative is very, very irresistible, attractive. And the alternative is of course, to be swallowed, to become the ghost in the machine. That's what we are all going to become, the ghosts in a machine, akin, similar to the imagery in the Matrix.